Hey guys. Tonight we ease into a place history tried very hard to bury under paperwork and silence. You're standing in a cold Manchurian dawn, breath fogging the air, watching a gate swing inward with the bored confidence of a place that doesn't expect questions. The sign means nothing to you yet, but the ground already feels wrong, too tidy, too intentional. You're told to walk, you walk, and somewhere between the gravel crunching under your shoes and the metal echo of that gate closing behind you, you realize you probably wouldn't survive here, emotionally, morally, or in any way that looks good on a resume. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment telling everyone where you're listening from and what time it is locally. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You keep moving, because stopping isn't an option anyone's offered. The compound is quiet in a way that feels rehearsed. Buildings sit with squared shoulders. Windows opaque, doors closed as if privacy is a principle rather than a courtesy. This is wartime Manchuria, late in the conflict, when empires lean hard on efficiency and fear does most of the talking. The common historical fact everyone learns later is that a secret unit operated here, tasked with research that had nothing to do with healing. What you feel now is smaller and sharper. The sense that curiosity is not welcome. A guard gestures. You step through another door. The air changes, cooler, cleaner, oddly clinical. You're processed with brisk politeness, which is somehow worse than cruelty. Papers are checked. A box is placed in your hands. Inside, clothes that don't fit your life anymore. Someone says a number. It might be your name now. You answer to it because answering is easier than thinking. A lesser-known detail, whispered much later, is that the bureaucracy here was meticulous, files were neat, handwriting careful, as if order itself could absolve intent. You're led down a corridor where footsteps sound too loud. White coats pass by, sleeves spotless, expressions neutral. They don't look at you long enough to be curious. That's the part that sticks. You've heard of scientists in war. Everyone has, but this feels different. Like watching chefs in a kitchen that never serves dinner. You make a quiet joke to yourself that at least the floors are clean. It's a thin joke, but it keeps your thoughts from running. Time stretches. You're given instructions that don't explain anything. Eat when told. Sleep when told. Wait. The waiting is immediate and total. You notice how silence here isn't empty, it's padded. Designed to absorb sound and questions alike. Another historical truth, often summarized in a sentence, is that secrecy was enforced not just by guards but by architecture. Rooms built to contain, doors built to forget. You sit on a narrow bed. The mattress sighs like it's tired of holding people. Somewhere far off, a machine hums steadily, the way modern appliances do when they're very sure of their purpose. You think about how normal that sound would feel at home, like a refrigerator doing its job, and how wrong it feels here. Modern comparisons creep in uninvited. Your brain tries to file this place under lab, hospital, office. None of the labels fit. A meal arrives. It's plain, measured, sufficient. The fact that it's adequate unsettles you more than hunger would have. You chew slowly, counting bites, counting seconds. A strange fact that doesn't make the headlines is how routine was used as a sedative. Predictable schedules can make almost anything feel survivable. Almost. You swallow and tell yourself this is temporary. Because telling yourself anything else would be louder than the room allows. You lie back and stare at the ceiling. It's smooth, uncracked, intentional. You try to remember the sound of wind through trees. Or traffic. Or anything not curated. The gate closing replays in your head. Softer now. Like a memory already filing itself away. You wonder who else passed through today. And whether wondering is a waste of energy. Historians still debate the precise chain of command and how responsibility was distributed inside this unit. Who ordered what? Who complied? Who looked away? For you, those questions are abstract. Right now, the only thing that matters is that the door doesn't open unless someone else decides it should. You turn onto your side. Pull the thin blanket up. And let the hum continue. The night settles, careful and complete, and you wait for morning without knowing what morning means anymore. Morning doesn't announce itself here. It just happens, quietly, like a system switching modes. The lights come on without warmth. And you sit up because everyone else does. You're learning quickly that hesitation attracts attention. And attention is not a currency you want to trade in. Someone calls out a number. It takes you a second to realize it's yours. You answer because silence feels heavier than compliance. They give you a new tag, thin metal. Stamped, impersonal. You turn it over in your fingers. Noticing how light it is. How easily it could be lost. Your name, the one you've carried all your life, suddenly feels bulky by comparison. Harder to store, harder to retrieve. You joke internally that at least numbers don't forget birthdays. It's a weak joke, but it keeps your breathing steady. This is one of the common historical facts people later learn. Prisoners here were stripped of identity and referred to by numbers. Not names. What's less often discussed is how quickly the mind adapts to that exchange. Being a number simplifies things. Expectations shrink. Questions disappear. Historians still debate whether this dehumanization was deliberate psychological conditioning or merely bureaucratic convenience. Standing here, holding your tag, you suspect it was both. You're led to a common area, clean, quiet, carefully arranged. Others sit where they're told. Eyes forward, hands still. You don't know where they came from. And you don't ask. Conversation is a risk you haven't budgeted for. A guard walks past with the relaxed posture of someone who knows exactly how much power he has. You make a mental note to imitate that calm someday. Preferably in a different life. Instructions follow. They're simple, almost gentle. Where to stand, when to move, what not to touch. The simplicity is the point. Complex rules invite interpretation. Simple ones invite obedience. You follow along, discovering that the day is segmented into neat blocks of time. Eat, wait, move, wait again. It feels less like a prison and more like a schedule that forgot its purpose. You're given work that isn't really work: cleaning, organizing, sitting. It keeps your hands busy and your mind occupied just enough. A lesser-known detail that surfaces much later is how routine labor was used to normalize the environment. To make extraordinary cruelty feel like an extension of ordinary life. Right now, it just feels dull. Dullness, you decide, is preferable to uncertainty. At lunch, you notice how everyone eats at the same pace. as if synchronized by an invisible metronome. You do the same. The food is bland but sufficient, calibrated to maintain bodies without encouraging conversation. You think about modern meal plans and calorie apps, and the comparison almost makes you laugh. Almost. You swallow the sound before it escapes. In the afternoon, you're moved again, corridors folding into each other like a maze designed by someone who dislikes exits. You pass doors you're not meant to notice. You notice them anyway. White coats move past, efficient and unhurried. One of them glances at your tag, not your face, and nods as if confirming a delivery. You tell yourself you're overthinking it. Overthinking burns energy. Historians still debate how much prisoners understood about where they were in those first days. Some accounts suggest confusion, others suggest dawning horror. For you, it's simpler. Understanding feels optional. Survival does not. You return to your room when told. Sit when told. Lie down when told. The day ends the way it began, without ceremony. As the lights dim, you touch the metal tag once more, feeling its cool certainty. You wonder how long it takes for a number to feel more real than a name. You don't wait for an answer. The hum returns, steady and indifferent, and you let it carry you into a shallow, cautious sleep. Life settles into a pattern so quickly it feels like it was waiting for you. You wake when the lights decide it's morning. You stand when the number before yours stands. You sit because sitting is allowed. The days here don't ask how you feel about any of this. They proceed with or without your consent, and you learn that the easiest way to survive is to move at their pace, not your own. You start to notice the choreography. Lines form without discussion. Meals appear and disappear on schedule. Doors open, pause, and close again with the same precise timing. Like a building that has learned how to breathe. This is one of the widely known historical realities of wartime detention facilities. Strict routine was used to maintain control with minimal force. What you didn't expect is how soothing that routine can feel at first. Predictability is a small mercy when everything else is uncertain. You're assigned simple tasks, cleaning floors that already look clean, sorting items that will be resorted later. The work is intentionally meaningless, though no one says that aloud. A lesser-known detail historians later uncover is that this kind of labor wasn't about productivity, it was about occupying the mind, keeping it too tired to wander into dangerous questions. You comply, because compliance keeps the day smooth. The people around you remain careful silhouettes. You recognize faces now, but you don't attach stories to them. Stories make loss louder. Instead, you notice habits. One man counts his steps. Another smooths his sleeve every time he sits. You develop one too, tapping your finger lightly against your leg. 3 times. Whenever a door closes, you joke internally that it's your new productivity app. It doesn't improve productivity, but it does give your hands something to do. The white coats continue to pass through your days like weather, present, influential, uninterested in conversation. They don't rush. They don't linger. They carry clipboards the way modern people carry smartphones. Glancing down, scrolling with their eyes, then moving on. The common historical fact is that this unit employed trained medical professionals under military command. The uncomfortable truth is how ordinary they appear while doing extraordinary things. Meals arrive with the same precision as before. You eat because eating is what comes next. You notice that no one talks about hunger. Hunger implies choice. This is more like maintenance. Calories as policy. You find yourself appreciating how efficiently it's done. And that thought makes you uncomfortable enough to distract you from being afraid. You tell yourself a small joke, that at least you don't have to decide what's for lunch anymore. Decision fatigue solved. Afternoon stretch. Waiting becomes the main activity. You wait in rooms that echo just enough to remind you you're inside something larger than yourself. A guard passes and checks numbers, not faces. You stand straighter, realizing posture matters now in ways it never did before. Historians still debate whether prisoners were conditioned intentionally to self-regulate or whether it emerged naturally under constant observation. You suspect the system didn't care how it happened, only that it did. As evening approaches, the building's mood shifts almost imperceptibly. Fewer footsteps, softer voices. You're returned to your room and given time that's yours in name only. You sit on the bed and listen to the hum, counting its rhythm like waves against a shore you can't see. You think about how modern life is full of notifications and noise. And how strange it is that silence can feel louder than all of it combined. Before sleep, you replay the day, not because it was interesting, but because it was complete. Nothing unexpected happened. You're not sure whether that's good news. Historians still argue about how long prisoners remained in this limbo before understanding what awaited them. For now, you let understanding stay optional. You lie back, pull the blanket up, and let routine tuck you in. The white coats begin to feel like a category rather than a group of people. You see them often now, gliding through corridors with the calm efficiency of professionals who know their schedules are protected. They carry notebooks close to their chests, pens clipped neatly, shoes polished just enough to suggest pride without vanity. When they pass, conversation thins. Even guards seem to give them space. You notice their expressions first. Not cruel, not kind, focused. The same look you've seen on people fixing complicated machines or solving puzzles that don't involve feelings. That, somehow, is what unsettles you most. You tell yourself a small joke, that at least they look like they know what they're doing. Your stomach doesn't agree with the humor. This is one of the well-known historical facts people later summarize in careful language. Trained medical professionals were deeply involved in the work here. Doctors, researchers, men who had sworn oaths that sounded comforting when you first heard them in another life. What's less commonly discussed is how ordinary they seemed to the people who saw them every day. Monsters, it turns out, don't always look the part. One of them stops in front of you today. Not abruptly, nothing here is abrupt, but deliberately. He checks your number, makes a mark on his paper, and nods, as if confirming that an object is where it should be. He doesn't ask how you're feeling. You don't offer. You joke internally that bedside manner must be optional in this department. You're guided to a different room than usual. Brighter, cleaner. The air smells faintly of disinfectant. Sharp and almost refreshing compared to the damp neutrality elsewhere. You're told to sit. You sit. The chair is cold. Metal pressing through thin fabric, reminding you of its presence with quiet persistence. Around you, instruments rest on trays, arranged with meticulous care. Nothing dramatic, nothing obviously threatening. That's the trick of it. The room looks like it belongs in a hospital brochure. the kind that promises progress and safety. A lesser-known detail, later debated by historians, is how deliberately clinical these spaces were designed to feel, how normalcy itself was used as a tool. Someone asks a question, simple and factual. You answer. Another note is made. The exchange is so calm it almost feels polite. You catch yourself thinking that if this were happening in another context, you might even trust these people. The thought alarms you enough to bring your focus back. Historians still debate how much the staff here believed in what they were doing, whether ideology, ambition, fear, or routine drove their actions most strongly. Sitting in this chair, you don't try to solve that puzzle. You're too busy noticing how easily a human voice can sound professional while discussing things that make your pulse quicken. After a while, you're dismissed. No explanation, no conclusion, just a gesture toward the door. You stand carefully, legs stiff, and follow instructions as if they were rails keeping you upright. As you leave, you glimpse another figure being led in. Eyes wide, movements hesitant. You don't look too long. Looking feels like a promise you can't keep. Back in your room, the hum feels louder than before. You lie down and stare at the ceiling, replaying the doctor's neutral tone, the clean lines of the room, the way nothing overt happened, and yet everything feels different. You joke quietly to yourself that maybe this is just an unusually thorough checkup. The joke dissolves as soon as it forms. Historians still argue about when prisoners first understood the true nature of this place. For you, understanding isn't a single moment. It's a slow accumulation, like water rising around your ankles. You pull the blanket up, breathe steadily, and tell yourself that staying calm is still a skill. For now, it's the only one you're allowed to practice. The rumors don't arrive all at once. They seep in, thin as steam, collecting near corners and doorways where people linger a half-second too long. You hear fragments first, unfinished sentences. Words lowered at the end. The way people speak when they don't want language to commit them. Someone mentions a room that never echoes. Someone else mentions schedules that don't repeat. You pretend not to listen, which is how listening works here. At night, the whispers get bolder, not louder, just braver. You learn to read mouths instead of sounds. You learn which guards look away and which don't. The stories aren't detailed. Detail would make them harder to pass along. Instead, they come as impressions. A feeling that people don't always come back the same way they leave. A feeling that checkups don't check for health. You joke internally that this place has the world's worst patient reviews. It's a brittle joke, but it gives your thoughts somewhere to sit. This is a commonly cited historical truth, summarized later in careful phrasing. Prisoners shared information in fragments, often without a clear picture of what was happening. What's less known is how protective that vagueness could be. Knowing everything at once might have been unbearable. Historians still debate whether partial knowledge increased survival by preventing panic, or merely prolonged suffering. You don't choose a side. You choose to keep breathing. The building has its own soundscape now that you recognize. Doors that open to corridors sound different than doors that open to rooms you don't return from. You file that away without labeling it. Labels invite conclusions. Conclusions invite fear. You stick to observation. Observation feels like control's quieter cousin. Meals continue on schedule, which feels almost insulting. The body appreciates the consistency. The mind resents it. You eat anyway. You always eat. You notice the food tastes the same every day. As if flavor has been standardized out of it. You tell yourself a small joke. That at least no one argues about seasoning. No one laughs. But no one needs to. You watch others more closely now. You notice who gets called and how often. You notice who avoids eye contact afterward. You notice the ones who tried too hard to act normal. As if normality might be contagious. A lesser-known detail that historians later pieced together is how observation became a quiet survival strategy. Prisoners mapping risk by routine. Not by evidence. You do the same, building a private chart in your head. One afternoon, someone doesn't return. There's no announcement. Their bed is cleared with efficient neutrality. You feel the absence like a missing note in a song you didn't realize you were memorizing. You tell yourself another joke, that maybe they finally got discharged. The word feels wrong even as you think it. Historians still debate how often prisoners understood the fate of others in real time. For you, it's never certain enough to confront directly. Certainty would require action, and action here is a luxury you can't afford. You sit when told, stand when told, and let the rumors pass through you without settling. As night comes, the hum resumes its steady reassurance. You lie back and stare at the ceiling, letting the day flatten into memory. The whispers quiet, not because they've been answered, but because fatigue has its own authority. You promise yourself, quietly, that you'll keep noticing. In a place built on silence, noticing feels like the last thing that's still yours. The activity doesn't come with a name. That's what makes it unsettling. You're led down a corridor you haven't seen before. Turns tighter, walls cleaner, as if cleanliness itself is part of the procedure. A door opens. You step in. No one says what this is. Only what to do. Stand here. Wait there. Breathe normally. You consider joking that breathing normally has become a specialty skill. The thought stays in your head. The room looks like it was designed to impress an inspector. Surfaces gleam. Instruments rest in tidy lines. Nothing dramatic. Nothing overtly threatening. It's the kind of space that suggests order and progress. The way modern labs do in promotional photos. The common historical fact people later learn is that this unit conducted experiments under the banner of science. What you're experiencing now is how science can feel when it forgets to explain itself. A figure in a white coat consults a clipboard. Your number is read aloud. Not unkindly. You nod, because nodding has become your safest response. Someone adjusts a device with careful hands. As if precision is a virtue that justifies everything else. You tell yourself a small joke, that you've had faster service at a dentist's office. The comparison doesn't help much, but it steadies your breathing. Time stretches in strange ways here. Minutes feel padded, seconds feel examined. You're aware of your body in a way that's hard to describe, less pain. More attention, as if you've been placed under a mental spotlight. A lesser-known detail historians later debate is how much psychological pressure alone was part of the process. How uncertainty itself became an instrument. Standing here, you feel that theory settle into your bones. Questions are asked, simple ones. You answer carefully, choosing words like you choose steps on thin ice. No one reacts. Notes are made. The lack of reaction is its own kind of feedback. You find yourself focusing on ordinary details, the hum of equipment, the faint smell of disinfectant, because focusing on anything else feels like leaning too far forward. You're dismissed without ceremony. No conclusion, no reassurance, no explanation, just a door opening and the unspoken instruction to leave. As you step back into the corridor, you notice your legs feel lighter than expected, as if your body is trying to convince you this wasn't important. Your mind doesn't agree. Back in the common area, the routine resumes as if nothing happened. That's the trick of it. Normalcy wraps itself around the experience, smoothing the edges. You eat when told. You sit when told. The day continues, which somehow makes the unnamed activity feel more real, not less. Historians still debate whether normalization was intentional or incidental. You don't care which. You only feel its effect. You watch others now with a new lens. You notice who returns quieter, who avoids certain corridors, who develops new habits overnight. You add these observations to your private map. It's not paranoia. You tell yourself. It's pattern recognition. Modern people would call it data collection. You almost smile at that. As evening settles, you lie back on your bed and let the hum wash over you. You replay the room without a name, the instruments that didn't announce themselves. The way professionalism can feel heavier than cruelty. Historians still argue about when prisoners realized that experiments were not meant to help them. For you, realization isn't a switch, it's a dimmer. Turning slowly. You close your eyes and practice breathing normally, just in case it's useful again tomorrow. Waiting becomes its own climate. It settles around you, cool and persistent, changing the way you experience time. After the unnamed activity, you're returned to the familiar spaces, but they feel subtly rearranged. Like furniture moved an inch to the left when you weren't looking. Nothing is different. Everything is different. You find yourself measuring hours not by clocks, but by how long it's been since your number was last spoken aloud. You notice how the building encourages this waiting. Corridors are just long enough to stretch anticipation. Benches are just uncomfortable enough to prevent rest. Silence is managed carefully, never absolute, never comforting. The common historical event people later reference is the steady expansion of this unit's operations during the war years. As resources and authority increased, what you feel instead is the expansion of uncertainty, filling every available corner of your thoughts. You sit, you stand, you wait again. Your body learns the posture of patience. Shoulders relaxed but ready, like someone waiting for an elevator that may or may not arrive. You joke internally that this place has perfected the art of suspense without the courtesy of a payoff. It's not funny, but the shape of a joke helps keep your thoughts from spiraling. Others around you wait too, each in their own careful way. You begin to notice how people manage the space between moments. One person stares at the floor as if it might offer instructions. Another watches the door with exaggerated calm. You adopt your own strategy, counting breaths in sets of 10. Then starting over. It's simple. It works. For now. A lesser-known detail historians later discuss is how waiting itself was used as pressure, how uncertainty exhausted people faster than physical strain. From the outside, nothing appears to be happening. From the inside, everything is happening all the time. You feel it in the way your heart speeds up at footsteps, then slows when they pass. Up, down. A rhythm you didn't ask for. When a door finally opens, it's never for you. That's part of the design. You learn that hope, raised and lowered repeatedly, becomes dull. You tell yourself another small joke, that if this were a modern service, you'd at least get a number and a display board. The irony almost makes you smile. Meals punctuate the waiting, offering structure without comfort. You eat because eating is something you can complete. Finish the bowl. Set it down. Done. It's a small victory in a day made of unfinished thoughts. Historians still debate how prisoners preserved a sense of agency under these conditions. You think agency shrinks to fit whatever space is left. As evening comes, the waiting doesn't end. It just changes tone. The lights soften slightly. Footsteps become rarer, more deliberate. You return to your bed and lie down. Not to sleep, but to reduce the number of choices you have to make. Lying down is allowed. Staying still is safe. You stare at the ceiling and let your breathing settle into its counted rhythm. 10 in, 10 out. Again, somewhere beyond the walls, the war continues, loud and decisive. In here, the war is quiet and patient. Historians still argue about which was harder to endure. You don't try to decide. You just wait, because waiting is what this place asks of you. And for now, you comply. The cold arrives without ceremony. Not the honest cold of winter air or wind on skin, but a deliberate, manufactured version that feels like it was ordered from a catalog. You notice it first in your fingers, how they stop reporting sensation accurately. How touch becomes a suggestion rather than a fact. You're guided into a room that looks prepared, calm, and entirely unconcerned with your comfort. The door closes with a soft finality that sounds almost polite. This is one of the widely known historical realities people mention in summaries. Extreme temperature exposure was studied here. The way it's usually phrased makes it sound abstract, technical. Standing now, breathing shallowly. You understand how language can sand down the edges of experience. The air is still, too still. You tell yourself a small joke, that at least the room is energy efficient. Your teeth disagree by chattering lightly. Time behaves strangely as the cold settles in. Minutes stretch thin, like they're being pulled apart. You focus on the basics. Inhale. Exhale. Don't let your thoughts wander too far. The surface you're on leaches warmth steadily, patiently, as if it has all the time in the world. A lesser-known detail historians later discuss is how carefully these environments were calibrated. Not to kill quickly, but to observe gradually. That word, gradually, feels heavy now. You notice people watching from behind glass. Not staring, just observing. Pens move, notes are made, no one rushes. Professionalism hums along like background music. You think about modern offices with glass walls and open plans. And the comparison is absurd enough to almost be funny. Almost. You remind yourself that absurdity can coexist with danger. The two aren't mutually exclusive. The cold sharpens your awareness in unexpected ways. Sounds feel closer. Your own breathing feels louder. You become acutely aware of posture, of where your weight rests, of how stillness conserves energy. You comply with instructions because they are few and clear. Move like this. Don't move like that. You follow them the way you'd follow a navigation app through unfamiliar streets, trusting that deviation will cost you. Historians still debate what the intended outcomes of these cold studies were: military preparedness, medical data, ideological obsession. From where you stand, Intention feels secondary to effect. The effect is that your body is no longer entirely yours. It's a system being tested. Its limits approached with curiosity rather than concern. Eventually, how long? You couldn't say, the process ends. The door opens. Warmer air rushes in like a promise that keeps itself. You're guided out, wrapped, monitored, returned to routine with an efficiency that suggests this happens often. Too often. You joke internally that you've just had the world's worst spa treatment. The humor lands softly, cushioning the memory. Back in the common area, life resumes as if nothing happened. That's the most disorienting part. People eat, people wait, the day continues. You rub your hands together, feeling sensation return in uneven waves. It's uncomfortable, but it's yours. You hold on to that. Historians still argue about how much prisoners understood about the risks they faced in moments like this. For you, understanding isn't a single realization. It's a series of small acknowledgments, each one colder than the last. You lie down when told. Pull the blanket up, and let the building's hum reclaim the space. The cold recedes slowly, but the knowledge lingers, quiet and precise, like frost you can't quite shake off. Your body starts to feel less like you and more like a list of features someone else is inventorying. You notice it in small ways first. How instructions refer to parts instead of people. How posture is corrected with gestures that never quite meet your eyes. You're positioned, adjusted, noted, not handled roughly, just handled. You make a quiet joke to yourself that you've become a particularly uncooperative piece of furniture. The thought steadies you more than it should. This is one of those historical realities that gets summarized in a phrase. Prisoners were treated as test subjects. What that phrase doesn't carry is the gradual shift in self-perception that follows. You begin to think in terms of measurements and responses because that's the language spoken around you. Heart rate, temperature, duration. Historians still debate whether this objectification was an intentional tactic or an inevitable byproduct of the system. From where you stand, or sit, or lie, when told, it doesn't matter. The effect is the same. You're moved through another controlled space. Cleaner than the last, quieter somehow. The staff speaks softly, efficiently, as if volume itself might introduce error. You answer questions when asked. You comply when directed. You find that compliance requires less energy than resistance. And energy feels like a resource to be conserved. You think about modern fitness trackers and health apps. How people willingly reduce themselves to data points. The comparison is uncomfortable enough to be almost funny. Almost. A lesser-known detail historians later discuss is how language inside the facility avoided personal pronouns. It wasn't you who reacted. It was the subject. You catch this shift as it happens. And for a moment you feel oddly transparent. Like your outline is still there but the fill has been removed. You counter the sensation by focusing on something stubbornly personal. The way your left shoe pinches. The rhythm you count under your breath. Small anchors. Private rebellions. Observation continues. Notes continue. No one explains what the notes mean. You realize that explanation isn't part of the design. Understanding might encourage interpretation, and interpretation might lead to questions. You tell yourself a dry joke, that at least you're generating paperwork. It lands quietly, just for you. When you're returned to the common area, Routine wraps around you again, smoothing the edges. Others look the same as before. And also different. The way people do after learning a new rule they won't say out loud. You sit, you wait, you eat when it's time. Your body responds as expected. And you file that away like a report you didn't choose to write. Historians still argue about how prisoners maintained a sense of self under these conditions. Some say it vanished, some say it hid. For you, it condenses. It becomes a smaller thing, easier to carry, a set of habits, a private count, a refusal to forget that you are more than the sum of what's being measured. As night settles, you lie back and let the hum return. You think about the word object and how wrong it feels. Even now, objects don't remember. Objects don't joke quietly to themselves to keep fear from getting too loud. You close your eyes and hold on to that difference. Thin as it is, for now, it's enough to remind you that you're still here. Silence becomes the loudest feature of the room. Not the kind that follows a shout, but the kind that exists on purpose. Like it was installed and tested before you arrived. You notice how voices lower automatically here. How even footsteps seem to apologize. Someone gestures for you to sit. You sit. The chair doesn't creak. Nothing creaks. Everything behaves. This is one of the commonly acknowledged aspects of the facility that later summaries mention briefly. Controlled environments designed to reduce variables. What that phrase hides is how silence itself becomes a variable, one that presses in from all sides. You can hear your own breathing too clearly. You joke internally that you'd pay good money for some background music. Your pulse declines the offer. A white coat speaks, not to you, but around you. Words float by like labels on boxes. Timing. Response. Note that. No one raises their voice. No one looks upset. Professional calm fills the space the way air fills a sealed container. Historians still debate whether this atmosphere was cultivated to reassure staff or to unsettle subjects. Sitting here, you suspect it did both. Efficiently. You focus on neutral details. The way a pen clicks. The way paper slides. The faint chemical smell that suggests cleanliness rather than care. You follow instructions because they are precise and because precision promises an end point. You tell yourself a small joke, that this feels like the world's most serious focus group. The comparison almost makes you smile. Then doesn't. Time moves oddly, not slow, not fast, just thick. You're aware of being watched without feeling stared at. A paradox that makes your thoughts loop. A lesser-known detail historians later discuss is how the absence of visible emotion from observers increased anxiety more than overt hostility would have. You find that idea very convincing right now. When it's over, when someone decides it's over, you're released back into the corridor without comment. No feedback. No, good job. Just a door opening and the unspoken instruction to resume being part of the building's flow. You stand, steady yourself, and walk because walking is expected. Back among the others, you notice the same silence has spread. People speak less, and when they do, it's about nothing that matters. Food, time, the weather you can't see. You eat because it's time to eat. The food tastes the same as yesterday. Which feels intentional. Consistency dulls memory. Or maybe it sharpens it. Historians still argue about which. As evening settles, you lie down and let the quiet return to its usual hum. You think about how silence can be used, how it can soothe, conceal, and command all at once. You tell yourself one last joke before sleep. Very softly. At least no one asked you to rate the experience. The thought fades as your breathing evens out, and the room holds its quiet, patient and complete. You notice the change before anyone explains it, which is to say, no one explains it at all. The meal arrives on schedule, same tray, same posture from the person setting it down, but something is off. The portions are measured differently. The texture is unfamiliar. The smell doesn't match yesterday's careful sameness. You stare for half a second longer than usual. Then begin eating because not eating would draw the wrong kind of attention. You tell yourself a small joke. That variety is supposed to be healthy. Your appetite files a formal complaint. Food here has never been about pleasure. You understood that early, but it has been about predictability. And predictability was a thin blanket you pulled up when the nights got long. This meal doesn't offer that. It offers questions instead. You choose slowly, cataloging differences like a reviewer who doesn't want to be quoted. Historians still debate whether dietary changes were intentional markers in a larger schedule or simply logistical noise. Sitting here, you feel how intention and accident can look identical from the inside. The common historical fact people later mention is that intake was monitored closely. Calories counted, timing logged. What's less known is how the meaning of a meal could shift overnight, turning nourishment into a message without words. You swallow and feel watched, not stared at, just included in a process. You think of modern wellness plans and trial diets, and the comparison almost makes you laugh. Almost. Around you, others notice too. No one says anything. Silence becomes consensus. One person eats faster than usual, as if speed might finish the problem. Another slows down, testing each bite. You adopt the middle path, the safest looking pace. You tell yourself a second joke, that if there's a lesson here, it's to never trust a menu change. The humor stays internal, folded neatly like a note you won't send. A lesser-known detail historians later puzzle over is how much fear can attach itself to ordinary routines once uncertainty enters them. Food is intimate. It crosses a boundary. When it changes without explanation, it invites interpretation. You feel your thoughts wanting to run ahead, to conclusions, to worst cases, and you pull them back. Gently but firmly. Thinking too far ahead has never helped here. After the trays are cleared, the day resumes its quiet choreography. You're moved, seated, weighted. The building doesn't acknowledge the difference you felt, which makes the difference feel louder. You watch the white coats pass, their clipboards unchanged, their pace steady. No one checks on you. No one asks how the meal sat. The absence of follow-up feels deliberate. By evening, the fear has settled into a dull background tone, like a refrigerator hum you can't turn off. You lie down and let the routine reclaim you as much as it can. Historians still debate whether prisoners understood the purpose behind such changes at the time. For you, understanding is less important than adaptation. You tell yourself one last quiet joke, that at least you didn't have to decide what to cook. Then you breathe, count, and let the day close around you, waiting to see what tomorrow decides to be. You start to understand fear as a schedule, not a spike. It arrives in predictable waves now, usually just before your number is called. then recedes into a manageable background hum when you're returned. Today, though, it lingers. It sits with you as you eat, as you wait, as you watch others be led away and brought back with expressions that refuse to settle into anything readable. Observation becomes unavoidable. You tell yourself you're not watching people, you're watching patterns. Who leaves in the morning and comes back by afternoon? Who is gone longer? Who returns quieter, or louder, or not at all? You don't ask questions. Questions imply hope of answers. You joke internally that you've become a very bad detective, solving cases you're not allowed to name. This is one of the commonly acknowledged historical realities. Prisoners were used in repeated procedures over time. Not just once. What's less often discussed is how that repetition trains you to imagine yourself from the outside. You start thinking ahead, how you might look to them, what notes might be written. The idea makes you uncomfortable. So you focus on something stubbornly immediate, the feel of the bench under your hands, the count of your breaths. When you're called today, it's later than usual. The delay feels intentional. Even if it isn't, you're led to a familiar corridor, then past it, into a space you haven't seen before. Brighter lights, a room arranged with a precision that feels ceremonial. You sit when told. You do not ask why. A lesser-known detail historians later debate is how novelty was used sparingly to keep subjects unsettled without overwhelming them. You feel that theory working in real time. The activity itself is calm, measured, and unnervingly ordinary. Instructions are given, notes are taken, no one raises a voice. No one rushes. You comply. Because compliance has become your safest language. You tell yourself a small joke, that this place has perfected the art of making terrible things feel like errands. The humor lands softly and stays there. When it's done, you're returned to routine without comment. The lack of explanation is worse than bad news would be. Bad news has edges. This has none. Back in the common area, you sit and watch the door you just came through, as if it might offer clarification. It does not. Evening comes. The meal tastes normal again, as if yesterday never happened. That, too, feels deliberate. Historians still debate whether inconsistency or consistency was more effective in breaking resistance. You decide the answer is inconsistency wrapped in consistency, a pattern that keeps you guessing while pretending there's nothing to guess about. You lie down and stare at the ceiling, letting the day replay in fragments. Not the actions, but the feeling of being observed, recorded, filed. You wonder how many versions of you exist now, in notes, in charts, in quiet discussions you'll never hear. The thought is heavy, so you set it aside. As sleep edges closer, you remind yourself of the one thing that hasn't changed. You're still noticing. You're still thinking. You're still you, even if the building prefers numbers. You count your breaths, let the hum steady you, and wait for the next day to reveal which version of routine it plans to offer. You start keeping a record without paper. It happens naturally, the way people memorize routes when maps are taken away. You note things that feel too small to matter until you realize they're all you have. The sound of a particular door hinge, the pause between a number being called and footsteps approaching, the way the light shifts in the corridor just before evening. This is your journal now, written in attention. You test your memory the way others test muscles. You replay the day in order, then backward, then in pieces. You notice which details stick and which slide away. The human mind, you discover, is excellent at cataloging fear when it has nothing else to do. You make a quiet joke to yourself that if there's ever an exam on this place, you'll pass with honors. The joke lands thinly, but it lands. This is one of those lesser-known truths historians later argue over. Many prisoners maintained internal records, knowing that written evidence would never survive. Memory became testimony in waiting. Of course, memory is fragile, and people know that too. You catch yourself wondering which parts you might be exaggerating, which parts you might be softening just to get through the day. The uncertainty bothers you more than you expect. You sit during waiting periods and listen. Not for secrets. Those are rare, but for rhythms. How often carts pass. How often white coats cross the common area. Which days feel heavier than others. You begin to sense patterns that don't announce themselves. This isn't hope. It's orientation. Knowing where you are, even approximately, feels like standing upright in a current. Occasionally, someone whispers something that aligns with your own notes. A glance that says yes. That happens too. No elaboration, no confirmation, just alignment. It's oddly comforting. You tell yourself a small joke, that this is the world's quietest book club. And everyone's reading the same invisible text. The humor stays with you longer than usual. The common historical fact people mention is that secrecy was absolute. What's less discussed is how people found ways to observe without speaking, to share without words. Historians still debate whether these micro-connections mattered. Sitting here, counting breaths, you're certain they did. They told you that your observations weren't hallucinations. That the building wasn't rearranging itself just for you. When your number is called today, you note the time by the light alone. You store it. The procedure is familiar now, which is its own kind of alarm. Familiarity can feel like progress even when it isn't. You comply. You answer. You return. Back in your space. You update the record in your head. Another entry added. Another day accounted for. As night comes, you lie back and review your invisible pages. You don't know who they're for. You don't know if they'll ever be useful. But keeping them feels important. Like tying a string around a finger you're not allowed to look at. Historians still argue about how memory functions under pressure, whether it fractures or sharpens. You suspect it does both. You close your eyes and let the day settle into its place. The journal continues, unwritten but intact. Tomorrow we'll add another line. The questions arrive quietly, which is how the most dangerous ones tend to show up. You don't hear them spoken aloud. They appear while you're waiting, while you're eating, while you're staring at a wall that's been repainted more times than you can guess. Why does this place exist? Why here? Why now? You let each question surface. Then set it gently aside. The way you'd move fragile objects you're not allowed to keep. This is the historical moment people usually summarize with big words: total war, national emergency, science pressed into service. The common event everyone recognizes is the escalation of research programs during the conflict. Nations racing to weaponize knowledge faster than their enemies. What you feel, sitting on a bench with your hands folded, is how those ideas translate when they meet a single human body. The translation is imperfect. You think about the word science the way people back home might think about it: white rooms, progress, cures. Here, it's quieter, procedural. wrapped in checklists. You make a small joke to yourself that this is what happens when a lab forgets to invite ethics to the meeting. The joke has a sharp edge, so you dull it by focusing on your breathing. A lesser-known truth that historians later argue over is how compartmentalized the work became. Tasks were divided so narrowly that many participants could claim they never saw the whole picture. You notice this in the way staff move, focused on their segment, uninterested in anything outside it. Specialization can be comforting that way. It keeps questions small. You're brought in again today. Not for anything new, but for something familiar. Familiarity has become a strange signal. You comply, because compliance keeps things smooth. And smooth days pass faster. You listen to instructions delivered in a neutral tone. And you think about how tone can carry meaning even when words don't. You joke internally that you've become fluent in this dialect of calm. It doesn't make you fluent in anything useful, but it passes the time. When you're returned, the common area feels slightly heavier, as if the air itself has been considering the same questions. You notice others avoiding your eyes, not out of unkindness, but caution. Shared questions are contagious. You don't want to be responsible for that. You sit, wait, and let the building's rhythm take over. Historians still debate whether the people who ran places like this believed their work would change the course of the war, or whether belief was beside the point once momentum took hold. From where you are, belief feels like a luxury item. You focus instead on sequence: stand, move, sit, eat. Sequence is reliable. As evening settles, the questions soften, not because they're answered, but because fatigue negotiates a truce. You lie down and let the hum smooth the edges of thought. Tomorrow will bring more procedures, more notes, more calm voices doing careful things. For now, you let the questions rest beside you, unanswered but contained, like tools put away until needed again. You discover the limits the way you discover most things here, gradually. And without announcement. There's no line painted on the floor, no buzzer that sounds when you've reached it. Instead, you notice how your thoughts shorten, how your patience thins, how the space between instruction and action feels heavier than it used to. You're still doing everything you're told. It just costs more. This is one of the widely recognized historical realities of prolonged detention. Endurance isn't a single heroic moment, it's a budget. Each day withdraws a little. The war outside continues its large, decisive movements. Fronts shift. Plans change. Speeches are made. Inside, the event that matters is smaller and quieter. Another day added. A lesser-known detail historians later discuss is how people recalibrated their sense of enough, lowering the bar just to keep clearing it. You feel that recalibration happening in real time. Your routine remains intact, but your internal commentary has changed. You used to narrate your day with dry humor to keep it manageable. Now the jokes arrive slower, like they're checking whether the room is safe before stepping in. You manage one anyway. You tell yourself you're building character at an impressive rate. The thought gets a tired nod from your own brain. When your number is called today, you notice your body responding before your thoughts catch up. Muscles tense. Breathing adjusts. You comply, of course. But the compliance is no longer automatic. It's negotiated. You sit when told and focus on something neutral, the corner of the table. The even spacing of tiles, anything that keeps your mind from racing ahead. Historians still debate whether anticipating outcomes helped people cope or made the strain worse. Right now, you'd vote for not anticipating anything at all. The activity itself is familiar, which should be reassuring. It isn't. Familiarity means you know where to look, where not to look, how long the waiting usually lasts. It also means you recognize the moment when it runs longer than usual. You don't panic. Panic is inefficient. You breathe, count, and tell yourself a very modern joke that you've waited longer for software updates. The comparison is flimsy, but it holds for a second, and that second matters. Afterward, you return to the common area and feel the delayed wait settle in. Not pain, not fear, fatigue with edges. You sit and let it pass through you without commentary. Like weather you can't change. Around you, others do the same. No one compares notes. No one needs to. The atmosphere says enough. A lesser-known truth that surfaces in later accounts is how people learned to pace themselves emotionally. How they rationed reaction the way they rationed energy. You skip reacting now. You save it for later. Though you're not sure what later means anymore. Historians still argue about whether this kind of restraint preserved people or hollowed them out. Sitting here, hands folded, you think it did a bit of both. Evening arrives on time, dependable as ever. You lie down and feel your body sink into the mattress. Grateful for gravity doing something predictable. You remind yourself, quietly, that you made it through another day. Not brilliantly, not heroically, adequately. In this place, adequate counts. You close your eyes and let the hum take over. The limit you touched today doesn't break you. It teaches you where to stand tomorrow. The memories that surface now aren't dramatic. They're inconvenient. You'll be standing in line, waiting for your number to be called. And suddenly you're thinking about things that once felt too small to remember. A cup that fit your hand just right. The sound of shoes on pavement that wasn't trying to swallow them. The way ordinary days used to arrive without permission slips. You don't invite these thoughts, they show up anyway. Like ads you can't skip. This is one of those common historical backdrops that everyone knows in outline. The war is still raging outside. Cities changing hands. Announcements blaring from radios you'll never hear. What's less often discussed is how prisoners measured the war by memory instead of maps. You remember a market that sold fruit. You remember standing in the sun without calculating how long it would last. These memories don't comfort you exactly. They remind you what normal used to mean, which is a double-edged comparison. You catch yourself comparing this place to absurdly modern things. And that almost makes you laugh. The way corridors funnel you from one point to another reminds you of airport security lines. Minus the coffee and complaints. You think, briefly, that at least airports explain delays. Joke number 1, it's not a strong joke. But it keeps your thoughts from drifting too far. The routine continues. Sit, stand, wait. When your number is called, you move without hesitation, because hesitation feels like a mistake you don't want to debug. Today's activity is familiar enough to be unsettling, unfamiliar enough to keep you alert. A white coat speaks in the same calm tone as always. Notes are made, pens move, you comply, because compliance remains the lowest energy option. A lesser-known detail historians later argue over is how comparisons to civilian life sometimes helped people endure. rather than break them, remembering ordinary inconveniences, missed buses, bad meals, boring meetings, gave suffering a scale. You use that trick now, telling yourself this is just an extremely poorly run office. Joke number 2. The office has terrible management and no exit strategy. But still, when you're returned to the common area, you notice others doing the same mental gymnastics. Someone stares at the wall like it's a window. Someone hums a tune that never quite forms. You don't speak, but you recognize the look. Mine's taking short trips elsewhere because staying fully present costs too much. Historians still debate whether nostalgia strengthened resolve or weakened it by highlighting loss. Sitting here, hands folded, you think it depends on dosage. Too much, and it hurts. Just enough, and it reminds you there's a world that isn't this room. As evening settles, you lie down and let the building's hum smooth things out. You picture a small, ordinary moment from before, nothing heroic, nothing special, and let it play once. Quietly. Joke number 3 slips in as you imagine complaining about something trivial. And you almost miss the ability to be annoyed about small things. You close your eyes and let the memory fade on its own. Tomorrow will bring its own routines, its own tests of endurance. For now, you rest in the comparison, gentle and brief, like a postcard from a place that still exists somewhere beyond these walls. Hope doesn't arrive with speeches or banners. It slips in sideways, tucked into half-heard comments and the way certain faces tighten when a guard mentions the calendar. You notice it in the pauses, longer than usual, between instructions. In the faint tension that hangs in corridors like air before rain. Someone whispers that things outside are changing. Not details, just changing. You file the word away and don't touch it too hard. This is the widely known historical backdrop everyone learns later. The war's momentum shifts. Fronts strain. Decisions ripple outward. What's less known is how those shifts were felt inside sealed places like this, not as news, but as rumor with a pulse. Historians still debate how quickly information filtered through layers of secrecy. Sitting here, you decide speed isn't the point. Direction is. You keep your routine intact. Sit, stand, eat, wait. You don't let hope rewrite the schedule. That would make it fragile. Instead, you treat it like a background app running quietly, useful, but not something you stare at. You tell yourself a small joke that if hope had a user manual, it would recommend, do not overuse. The thought earns a faint internal nod. When your number is called today, the corridor feels subtly different, not brighter, not darker, just alert. The white coats move with the same efficiency. But their conversations shorten. Pens pause before notes are made. You comply as always, focusing on neutral details, tile edges, the steady hum, the way professionalism sounds when it's trying not to sound like anything at all. A lesser-known detail historians argue over is whether staff sensed external pressure before subjects did. You can't prove it, you can feel it. Back in the common area, you catch a glance that lingers a fraction longer than usual. Another person meets your eyes, then looks away, as if both of you agreed not to name the thought. Alignment without words. You store it next to the others in your mental ledger. Meals arrive unchanged. That steadiness is reassuring. Or strategic. You don't try to decide which. You eat at your usual pace, letting the familiar motions anchor you. Someone hums under their breath, so softly it might be accidental. You pretend it is. Hope grows best when it's not stared at. Historians still debate whether prisoners' morale rose or fell with rumors of approaching endings. From where you sit, it does both. Hope lightens the chest and tightens it at the same time. It's a careful emotion, requiring balance. You keep it small on purpose, like a flame you shield with your hand. As evening settles, you lie down and let the hum smooth the edges of the day. You think, not plan. Just think, that change doesn't have to be loud to be real. Sometimes it arrives as a difference in timing. A pause in a sentence. A word chosen carefully. You breathe, count, and let the thought rest beside you without asking it to promise anything. Tomorrow will decide what it wants to be. For now, hope stays where you put it, quiet, contained, and just strong enough to keep the night from feeling endless. The word responsibility drifts through the air today. Not spoken aloud but implied in the way people move. You feel it in the stiffness of conversations that stop when you approach. In the careful neutrality of faces that used to glance past you without thought. Something about the place has shifted from routine to record keeping. From procedure to accounting. You don't know why. You only know the tone has changed. This is where the historians step in later, arguing over who did what, who knew what, and when knowing became choosing. The common historical fact is that this unit operated with layers: military command, medical staff, technicians, clerks, each able to point to another layer when questions arrived. The lesser-known truth is how convincing that structure felt from the inside. Responsibility didn't vanish, it dissolved, spread thin enough that no single person felt its full weight. You notice it in small exchanges. A white coat hesitates before signing a form. A guard rereads an instruction as if checking its wording might change its meaning. You tell yourself a dry joke, that everyone seems very interested in paperwork today. The humor lands quietly, but it steadies you. Paper has a way of outlasting people. And everyone here seems suddenly aware of that. When your number is called, the procedure itself is familiar, nothing new, nothing dramatic. What's different is the attention to documentation. Notes are longer. Cross-checks happen twice. You're asked to repeat a simple response. Not because it wasn't heard, but because it needs to be confirmed. Historians still debate whether this late-stage meticulousness reflected conscience, caution, or fear of future scrutiny. Sitting here, you feel how those motivations can look identical. You comply. Because compliance is still the safest path through the moment. You focus on the neutral details, the even lighting, the quiet hum, the way chairs are positioned with unnecessary precision. You joke internally that if order alone could decide right from wrong, this place would win awards. The thought doesn't make you smile, but it keeps your breathing steady. Back in the common area, conversation is thinner than usual. People seem to sense that the record is being written now. Even if no one knows who will read it. You catch a glance from someone across the room. A look that says remember this. You nod almost imperceptibly. Your unwritten journal adds another entry. Historians still argue whether individuals inside the unit believed they were shielded by hierarchy or haunted by it. From where you sit, hierarchy feels like a fog, thick enough to hide in, thin enough to let consequences seep through. You eat when told, tasting very little, letting routine do what it does best, carry you forward without asking permission. As evening settles, you lie down and replay the day in fragments. Not the actions, the paperwork, the procedures, but the pauses, the hesitations, the careful checking of boxes. You sense that people are beginning to imagine a future audience. And that imagination changes behavior in subtle ways. You close your eyes and let the hum return. The debate about responsibility can wait for books and classrooms. For now, you keep noticing, keep remembering, and keep yourself intact in the smallest ways available. Tomorrow will add another layer to the record, whether anyone wants it to or not. The procedure announces itself with paperwork before it announces itself with people. Forms appear, clips snap shut, a cart rolls by carrying folders instead of equipment. And somehow that feels heavier. You're called not by urgency, but by sequence. Your number slots neatly into a column. And that's that. Coldness here isn't cruelty, it's administration. This is a familiar historical event, though it's rarely framed this way. Late in the war, processes tightened, reviews multiplied, protocols hardened. When institutions sense scrutiny on the horizon, they don't necessarily slow down, they document faster. A lesser-known detail historians still argue over is how much of this late-stage bureaucracy was meant to preserve knowledge versus preserve innocence. Sitting where you are, you feel the answer isn't clean. You're guided to a desk rather than a room. That alone changes the temperature of the day. Desks mean forms. Forms mean permanence. Someone reads your number aloud, then reads it again, slower, as if repetition might make it behave. You sign where you're told to sign, even though your name isn't required. You joke quietly to yourself that this is the most attention your handwriting has ever received. The paper doesn't laugh. The questions are procedural, not personal. Date, condition, duration. You answer because answers are expected, not because they're wanted. Pen scratch. A stamp lands with a soft, definitive thud that sounds far too satisfying. You think of modern checklists and compliance trainings and almost smile, almost, at how familiar this all feels in shape. If not in consequence. Joke number 2 drifts through your head. Congratulations. You've completed the survey. Historians still debate whether this emphasis on procedure reflected a belief that systems could outlast morality. Watching forms stack neatly, you feel how appealing that belief can be. Systems don't blush. They don't hesitate. They don't remember faces unless instructed to. A third, gentler joke occurs to you. That if order were a blanket, everyone here would be very warm. It helps you keep your shoulders relaxed. When it's over, there's no transition. You're returned to the common area as if nothing happened. Which is the point. The building prefers continuity. You sit, you wait, you eat on schedule. The food tastes the same. Which feels intentional. Consistency as anesthesia. Around you, others carry the same thin stiffness. The kind that comes from being filed rather than handled. As evening approaches, you replay the day not for fear, but for accuracy. What was asked? What was written? What wasn't? Your unwritten journal adds another careful line. Historians will argue later about intent and knowledge and chains of command. For you, tonight, the truth is smaller and colder. Procedures happened, and you were inside them. You lie down and let the hum reclaim the room. Paperwork fades from your thoughts first. The stamp sound lingers a little longer. You breathe, count, and let the day file itself away, waiting to see what tomorrow decides to record. You feel it before you can name it, a thinning, not of people or objects, but of restraint. Conversations among staff grow more efficient, less careful with tone. Doors that once stayed closed now open a fraction longer. The routines remain, but the reasons for them feel frayed, like rules kept alive by habit rather than conviction. This is the historical moment often summarized as a moral collapse under pressure. As the war's demands intensified, lines that once seemed immovable became negotiable. The common fact everyone agrees on is that ethics were abandoned here. The less obvious truth, and the one historians still debate, is how that abandonment happened. Slowly, bureaucratically, one checkbox at a time. You're not witnessing a dramatic fall. You're watching erosion. You're brought into a familiar room. But the energy is different. There's less explanation than usual. Fewer pauses between steps. Professional calm remains. But it's thinner now. Stretched. You comply. Because compliance has been your safest language for a long time. But you notice your compliance being taken for granted rather than recorded. That shift matters. A white coat speaks. Not unkindly, but briskly. Notes are made without the earlier double checks. Someone nods and moves on before the moment can settle. You tell yourself a small joke. That efficiency must be the new virtue. The joke lands flat, but it keeps your breathing even. This is where the historians argue hardest. Some say ideology drove everything. Others say momentum did. From where you sit, it looks like convenience wearing a lab coat. When systems run long enough without challenge, they stop asking why. They ask how fast. You feel that acceleration in your chest. A quiet urgency that doesn't belong to you. When you're returned to the common area, you notice the same thinness everywhere. People move faster. Guards check numbers with less ceremony. The day seems eager to be done with itself. You eat when told, tasting almost nothing, and focus on finishing rather than savoring. Completion has become the goal. As evening settles, you lie down and stare at the ceiling, thinking about lines, ethical ones, drawn and erased without anyone lifting a pen. Historians still debate when science here stopped pretending to be humane. You suspect it never pretended. It just stopped pretending not to be something else. You close your eyes and let the hum smooth the thought away. Tomorrow will continue whether questions are answered or not. Tonight, you rest in the uneasy knowledge that systems don't need villains to do harm, just momentum. Permission, and silence. The act is so small it almost escapes notice. Which is probably the point. It happens between instructions, in the narrow space where no one is looking directly at you. You shift your weight a fraction later than expected. You meet a pair of eyes for half a second longer than protocol allows. You breathe out when you're supposed to be still. None of it would register on a clipboard. And that's what makes it feel enormous. This is the historical paradox people later struggle to articulate. Resistance doesn't always announce itself with slogans. Often it's microscopic, a refusal to vanish completely. Historians still debate whether such moments mattered at all. Whether they changed outcomes or merely preserved a sense of self. Standing where you are, you decide the scale of the effect isn't the point. The existence of the act is. You notice the reaction, or rather, the lack of one. No reprimand, no note. The system absorbs the deviation and moves on. You tell yourself a small joke, that you've just discovered a software bug. The humor steadies you. It tells you there are still seams in this place, however small. Later, during the day's routine, you repeat the experiment in safer ways. You choose the chair that isn't indicated, but is identical. You eat one bite slower than the person next to you. You keep your gaze on the wall instead of the floor. These aren't rebellions, they're reminders. You're still choosing, even if the choices are tiny and mostly symbolic. A lesser-known detail historians argue over is whether agency can survive in fragments. You're collecting fragments now. When your number is called, the procedures proceed as usual. The room is familiar. The tone is brisk. You comply, because survival still depends on it. But inside, something has shifted. You're not testing the system anymore. You're testing yourself. How much presence can you keep without drawing attention? How much can you remember when memory feels inconvenient? You return to the common area with the quiet satisfaction of having done something that no one can take from you because no one noticed it existed. You sit, wait, eat. The day resumes its neutral pace. Around you, others move with the same careful choreography. You wonder, briefly, how many of them are doing the same invisible math. Historians still debate whether resistance must be visible to count. You decide it doesn't. Tonight, you lie down and let the hum settle the room. The small acts don't add up to escape. They add up to continuity. To proof that you are still here. Choosing, quietly, persistently, within the narrow margins left to you. The news doesn't arrive as news. It arrives as distortion. Schedules slip by a few minutes. Orders get repeated, then corrected. You hear a name spoken twice in the same day by different people. Each time with a different emphasis. As if the word itself is being tested for weakness. Somewhere beyond these walls, something is moving fast enough to make ripples here. This is the historical backdrop everyone recognizes in hindsight. The war is turning. Fronts collapse. Alliances strain. Messages rush where certainty used to sit. What you feel instead is indirect pressure. Like weather changing miles away but shifting the air all the same. Historians still debate how much those inside sealed facilities knew about the broader conflict as it shifted. From where you are, knowledge arrives as atmosphere, not information. You notice guards checking doors more often. White coats consult each other in shorter bursts. Voices lowered further than usual. Clipboards change hands. Someone rereads a page and frowns. Then smooths their expression as if the paper offended them. You tell yourself a small joke. That everyone seems very interested in their calendars today. The humor is thin, but it keeps your thoughts from racing. When your number is called, the route changes. Not dramatically, just one extra turn. One door that opens sooner than expected. The room you're led into is familiar. But the procedure feels rushed. Like an errand squeezed between meetings. Notes are made quickly. Questions are fewer. The lack of curiosity is its own message. A lesser-known truth historians argue over is how urgency can replace intent without anyone noticing the swap. Sitting here, you feel that replacement in the pace of hands and voices. Back in the common area, the same distortion continues. People glance at each other. Then look away. Meals arrive on time but are cleared faster. The day feels compressed, like someone trying to finish a task list before a deadline no one will name. You eat at your usual pace anyway. Routine is your anchor. You don't let the current pull it loose. A whisper passes, so brief it's almost a breath, that outside forces are closer than they were yesterday. No details, no confirmation, just closer. You don't repeat it. Repetition gives rumors weight. You store it instead, carefully, like a fragile object you might need later. Historians still debate whether hope spiked or faltered during moments like this. For you, it does both at once. Hope sharpens your attention and tightens your chest. You keep it small, manageable, the way you've learned to keep everything else. You lie down when told and listen to the hum, noticing how it competes now with a faint urgency in the walls themselves. You breathe, count, and wait. Change is moving somewhere nearby. You don't know if it's moving toward you or past you. Tonight, you let the possibility exist without asking it to promise anything. You realize how much never made it onto paper by noticing what suddenly doesn't get written down. The notes grow shorter, the margins widen, clipboards pass by without stopping as often. Whatever this place once planned to remember, it's starting to forget on purpose. That, strangely, feels louder than documentation ever did. This is one of the less comfortable historical truths that surfaces later. Much of what happened here survived only in fragments, reconstructed from memory and implication rather than records. The common fact people know is that evidence was destroyed as the war closed in. What's less known, and still debated by historians, is how selective that destruction was. Some files vanish entirely, others are trimmed, softened, made ambiguous enough to argue about later. Sitting here, you feel the absence taking shape. You notice it during a routine check. A question that used to be asked isn't. A response that once earned a note now passes without comment. You tell yourself a small joke, that efficiency has reached peak performance and cut out the middleman. The humor is thin, but it keeps your breathing steady. Silence, once padded and deliberate, now feels rushed, as if it has somewhere else to be. When your number is called today, the process is brief, too brief. You're guided in, positioned, observed, then dismissed with a nod that says good enough. No adjustments, no follow-ups. It's unsettling in a new way. A lesser-known detail historians argue over is how end-of-operation phases often involve shortcuts, not because people become kinder, but because time becomes more valuable than precision. You feel that trade being made with your presence. Back in the common area, others sense it too. People sit straighter, not out of fear, but alertness. The rhythm of the day is still there, but it stumbles slightly, like a song played at the wrong speed. Meals arrive and are cleared quickly. You eat without tasting much, focused on finishing before the next change arrives. You catch a glance from someone across the room, a look that says remember this. Not the actions, but the absence of them. You nod once, small and controlled. Your unwritten journal adds a careful entry, today. They stopped asking. Historians still debate how much can be learned from gaps in the record. Sitting here, you think gaps might be the loudest parts. As evening settles, the building feels impatient. Doors close faster. Voices stay low but move quickly. You lie down and stare at the ceiling, noticing how the hum seems strained, as if even the machinery is aware it's running out of time. You tell yourself one last quiet joke, that if forgetting were an art, this place would be very busy. You close your eyes and let the day settle. incomplete but recorded where it counts. Tomorrow will decide what it wants to erase next. Tonight, you rest with the knowledge that remembering doesn't always require ink. Sometimes it just requires you to still be here. Time stops behaving politely. It no longer lines up with the lights or the meals or the calls of numbers. Instead, it bunches and stretches, as if the building itself is losing interest in keeping things tidy. You feel it when you wake before the lights and when the day ends without the usual sense of closure. The place still functions, but it's functioning on momentum, not intention. This is the phase historians often describe with restrained language, the closing period. The common historical fact is that operations here accelerated, condensed, and then fragmented as external pressure mounted. What's less discussed is how that compression felt to the people inside it. Days collapse into each other. Events blur. The future arrives faster than the mind can prepare for it. You notice staff moving with a different energy now, efficient. Yes, but also distracted. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Instructions are delivered with fewer words. Someone double-checks a door, then checks it again, as if reassurance can be found in repetition. You tell yourself a small joke, that everyone seems to be packing up without boxes. The humor lands quietly and stays there, doing its job. When your number is called today, the route changes again, not to anywhere new, just faster. The procedure is shorter, more cursory. You comply, because that's still the rule. But you feel like an afterthought rather than a subject. A lesser-known truth historians argue over is how end phases often devalue individuals not out of cruelty, but haste. You feel that haste brushing past you. Uninterested. Back in the common area, the same thinness lingers. People speak even less, conserving words like resources. Meals arrive on time but feel rushed, as if the schedule is trying to stay ahead of itself. You eat steadily, letting the familiar motions anchor you. Routine is still useful, even when it's fraying. You start to sense an ending without knowing its shape. Not hope, not dread, just the awareness that the pattern can't continue much longer because patterns require maintenance. Historians still debate whether prisoners sensed release, destruction, or something else entirely during these final stretches. Sitting here, you don't guess. Guessing costs energy. As evening settles, the building's hum grows uneven, a little louder in places, a little quieter in others. You lie down and let your breathing match whatever rhythm it offers. You remind yourself, gently, that noticing has carried you this far. Tomorrow will add another chapter. Whether it wants to be remembered or not. The fear changes texture. It's no longer sharp or immediate, it's familiar. Like furniture you've learned to walk around in the dark. You wake with it already present, settled in your chest before the lights decide it's morning. This isn't panic. Panic burns too hot. This is something steadier, a background state you've grown accustomed to. The way people adapt to constant noise without realizing it's there. This is one of the uncomfortable historical truths that often gets softened later. Prolonged exposure doesn't make fear disappear, it domesticates it. The common event people point to is the sheer duration of captivity. The lesser-known detail historians still debate is how that duration rewires expectation. You stop asking if something will happen and start wondering when. Which is a much quieter, heavier question. You notice how your body anticipates before your mind does. Muscles tense a fraction of a second before doors open. Your breathing adjusts when footsteps approach. You joke internally that you've developed an impressive predictive algorithm. The humor is tired, but it still does its job. It reminds you that part of you is watching all of this, not just enduring it. When your number is called today, you move without thinking. The procedure unfolds with the same thin efficiency as yesterday. No novelty, no explanation, just motion and record. You comply because compliance is still the currency that keeps the day moving. A lesser-known truth historians argue over is how familiarity can be as corrosive as cruelty. Sitting here, you feel that corrosion, not dramatic, just persistent. Back in the common area, you sit and let the day pass through you. Others do the same. The room feels less like a holding space and more like a waiting room for something undefined. You eat when told, tasting almost nothing, focusing on finishing. Completion has become comforting. Endings, even small ones, matter now. As evening approaches, you realize you're no longer bracing for the next thing. You're absorbing it. That scares you more than fear ever did. Historians still debate whether normalization was the final victory of the system. You don't try to decide. You just notice it, which feels like the smallest possible countermeasure. You lie down and stare at the ceiling, letting the hum smooth the edges of thought. The fear doesn't leave. It settles beside you, familiar and contained. You breathe, count, and let the day close, not with relief, but with recognition. The signs arrive quietly, the way everything else does here. Not alarms, not shouting, just a change in posture, in urgency, in the way people stop pretending the schedule will last forever. You notice guards checking locks with unnecessary care, testing doors that have never failed before. You notice white coats carrying fewer papers and glancing at corridors instead of charts. The building, once so confident in itself, feels suddenly aware of time. This is the historical moment usually summarized as the end approaching. Everyone agrees on that much. What historians still debate is how clearly the people inside understood what that end would look like. From where you stand, understanding comes in fragments. The fragments are enough. You don't need a full picture to sense when a system is preparing to close its own doors. You're called later than usual today. Much later. The waiting stretches thin, almost transparent, when you're finally led away. The route is familiar but the pace is hurried. Like someone trying to finish a checklist before losing the page. The procedure itself is shorter than ever. Instructions are clipped. Observations are cursory. You comply, because compliance still keeps you moving forward. But you notice how little interest there is in the outcome. A lesser-known detail historians argue over is how end stages often reveal priorities more clearly than beginnings. At the start, everything was documented, justified, explained. Now, efficiency rules. You feel it in the way you're dismissed without the usual pause. Sent back as if you're an item already accounted for. You tell yourself a small joke, that you've officially been downgraded from subject to loose end. The humor is dry, but it keeps your breathing steady. Back in the common area, the same thin urgency hums. People sit straighter, eyes moving more than before. No one speaks. There's nothing left to clarify. Meals arrive late and leave early. You eat anyway, because eating is still something you can complete. Completion feels important now. You catch a glance from across the room, longer than usual. Heavier. Not fear. Recognition. You nod once. The smallest acknowledgement. And look away. Your unwritten journal adds another line. They're finishing. Historians still debate whether prisoners sensed what came next. Sitting here, you think sensing is easier than knowing. Knowing invites expectation. Sensing just prepares you to pay attention. As night settles, the building's hum stutters briefly. Then resumes. You lie down and stare at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything that was measured, recorded, and then quietly abandoned. Tomorrow will decide what kind of ending this place chooses. Tonight, you rest with the knowledge that even systems built on control eventually lose interest in maintaining it. The door opens without the usual pause. And that alone tells you this isn't another routine adjustment. There's no ceremony, no careful phrasing, just a gesture and an instruction to move. You stand, because standing has always been the correct answer here, and follow the corridor as it bends toward a part of the building that smells less like disinfectant and more like haste. The air feels packed, as if decisions are being stored everywhere. This is the historical moment that later accounts circle with the most uncertainty. The common fact is that, as outside pressure closed in, final decisions were made quickly and unevenly. What historians still debate is the intent behind those decisions: containment, concealment, or something else entirely. From where you are, intent is a rumor. Action is what matters. You're brought to a room that looks familiar in shape but stripped of detail. Fewer instruments, fewer notes. People stand farther apart, as if proximity itself has become risky. Instructions are delivered in short bursts. Efficient and final sounding. You comply. Because compliance has carried you this far and because resistance would require energy you've learned to conserve. You tell yourself a small joke, that this feels like the last meeting of a project no one wants to present. The humor is thin, but it steadies your breathing. There's a weight to the air that doesn't come from fear alone. It's consequence, hovering. The way a storm presses down before rain. You notice how carefully people avoid each other's eyes now. Eye contact suggests recognition, and recognition suggests memory. Memory is inconvenient at endings. A lesser-known detail historians argue over is how often people choose speed over clarity when time runs out. You feel that choice being made around you. When it's over, when someone decides it's over, you're not debriefed or dismissed with words. You're moved aside, then moved again, as if the building is rearranging its own contents. The usual rhythm is gone. In its place is something blunt and directional. You hold onto the smallest anchors you have: posture, breath, the count you've practiced for so long it feels like a companion. You realize, quietly, that this is the fate everyone whispered about without naming. Not a single dramatic moment, but a narrowing of options until only one remains. Historians still debate whether prisoners understood their fate clearly at the end. For you, understanding arrives as acceptance without detail. The shape of it is enough. As you're guided onward, you take in the room one last time: the walls, the light, the way the hum sounds slightly off, like a machine preparing to shut down. You tell yourself one final, gentle joke, that if this is the conclusion, at least it's on schedule. The thought softens the edge just enough. You breathe, you stand, you move when told, and in that movement, you carry everything you noticed. Everything you recorded without paper. Forward into whatever comes next. The end doesn't announce itself. It simply narrows the world until there's less to notice. And then less still. You're guided through a corridor that feels shorter than it used to. Though you know it isn't. Perspective changes when the future stops branching. The air is calm, almost considerate, and that calm feels like a decision that's already been made. This is the historical space where accounts thin and arguments begin. The common fact is that many prisoners did not survive the final days here. The lesser-known truth, still debated by historians, is how uneven and improvised those final actions were. Shaped by haste more than plan, by erasure more than closure. Standing where you are now, you feel the absence of ceremony as clearly as anything else. No speeches, no explanations, just motion. You're aware of your body in a gentle, distant way. Breath in, breath out. The count you've practiced so long keeps time for you now. Like a familiar tune played softly in another room. You notice the light on the wall, the texture of paint, the way sound carries differently here. Small details float forward and then drift away. Unclaimed, you think, briefly, that this place has always preferred quiet endings. If there's a joke left in you, it's a kind one. You tell yourself that you've attended worse meetings, waited longer lines, survived more confusing processes. It's a thin comparison, but it warms the edges of your thoughts. Humor, even now, does its small work. Historians will continue to debate responsibility, scale, and knowledge. They will argue over documents and gaps, over who knew and when, over how systems can make cruelty feel procedural. Those debates matter, but they happen later, somewhere else, in rooms with windows. What matters here is simpler and heavier. You noticed. You remembered. You remained present. The sounds soften. The images blur at the edges. Not abruptly, but kindly, like a lens easing out of focus. Let your shoulders drop. Let the count slow. Let the building's hum fade into something more like wind, then into nothing at all. You don't need to hold anything anymore. The record you kept without paper can rest now. Breathe once more, easy and unforced. The day loosens its grip. The night opens, wide and quiet, and you drift with it. End of script. Sweet dreams.